I was just saying to our speakers that we have tough competition because at least in Germany, the day is gorgeous. It's warm and sunny, and I understand that a lot of people are probably outside right now. So thank you for coming and participating. And so as we get started, I'm assuming there might be a few more people coming in as we speak. Yeah, just very quickly, before we get started, maybe post into the chat where you're dialing in from, because I already know that we have some people from far away. So it would be amazing to see. So for me, it's Berlin, Frankfurt, France, Bochum, Fintorn community in Scotland. Ooh, USA, Bochum, wonderful. Brussels, fantastic. Zurich. Okay, so we have quite the international group here from Greece. Wonderful. Yeah, so it is my pleasure to see all of you here today. And Mark, our IT support, will just say a couple of things for our starting point here to make sure that we have most of our attention on the speakers. Mark.
Hi, everyone. During the talk, we ask you to please disable your video so we only have the actual speakers in view. And for you to only have the speakers in view, what you can do is once you've disabled your video, you go to your little disabled video icon or that of someone else's. And then on top right, you have 3 little dots. You click that and check hide non-video participants, and that will basically take all those little cards away so we only see the speakers. If you're on mobile, you should be able to swipe, and that should switch to only the speakers. Depending on your screen size, that may vary because you might only already see the speakers only. All right.
Okay, fantastic. If anyone has a question, you're of course also welcome to unmute yourself and ask to be taken through that again. Yeah, so if you could please turn off your video now, that would be great. Everybody's finding their little button. Wonderful. Okay, so the only 3 people you should be seeing right now is myself, Markus, Wörner, and Avida Hancock in your panel. So let me do a very quick introduction of myself. For those of you who don't know me, I'm one of the co-founders of Conscious You, and we are a company specialized in facilitating collective transformation through scalable online coaching programs. And one of these programs that we're offering to the wider public is a program called See You Money, which is based on the work of my friend and mentor, Peter Koenig. And this is all about rediscovering our relationship with money and then redefining our relationship with money. And as part of this whole endeavor, making people more money conscious, I put on this series called Money Talks, where I invite speakers who I find to be fascinating or dealing with fascinating topics, and usually both, and to interview them about all things money. So for today, I have the great pleasure to have Avida Hancock with us. Avida is the founder and CEO at eequ, and eequ is a learning platform and education system. And we will get a chance for Avida to say a few more things about that towards the end of our conversation today. But in her capacity, why we invited her is one of her expertises in her past was that she was working for a tech company in the UK, and under their umbrella built an AI-based system that distributed over £2 million in payroll every year. And that was entirely data-driven in terms of how salaries were distributed in the team. And from Avida's perspective, actually, the data-driven AI systems are not only the future, but also she feels outperform the most perceptive manager or sophisticated salary council. So Avida, I'm very, very happy to have you here with us today, and quite fascinated about the perspective you're going to share in a moment. And then we have on sort of, the tech-driven side today is represented by a woman, which I also think is great, whereas the more feeling side of matters today is represented by Markus Wörner, who is head of orgasmic marketing and PR at Einhorn. And Einhorn is a company based here in Berlin. They make vegan condoms and other products in the wider range that you can find them in most stores, and they look amazing and are really fun. And he's also co-creator of a new work hub. And Markus, like many of us, has asked himself at some point, why do I even get up out of bed every morning, realizing that it could hardly just be for money. So one of the things he set out to do together with the team at Einhorn was to embark on a new work journey. And part of the new work journey has also been looking at salary. So Markus is part of the Salary Council at Einhorn, and will talk about transparency, the focus on needs, and what role performance plays in systems like this. And and then maybe he can also say a few things about condoms if he feels that is necessary at the end. So we also want to give you the space to talk about the things you're excited about. Yeah, so that is a brief introduction from my end. And Avida, I gave you and Markus sort of 3 more personal questions to introduce yourself. So I would be very excited to hear you speak to these 3 questions. You're still muted.
Hello, thank you so much for asking me. That's so kind of you. And it's really lovely to be with you this afternoon. It's very sunny in England too, so I appreciate that. If anyone at all is watching, that's very generous of you. So your questions, what did I learn about money when I was growing up? It sounds like a bit of a cliche, but as I was growing up, I had some unusual experiences of going from poverty to riches, to poverty to riches, quite a few times throughout my life. And I realized that there was no correlation between my wealth and my happiness. In fact, in my personal situation, there was an inverse correlation. And the times that I've been least wealthy, I have been at my most happiest, and inversely. So that sounds like a cliche, but I now have no regard whatsoever for money or salary or any of these things. And how does that influence the work that I'm doing? Well, hugely, actually. And one of the motifs that we carry in our company now with education is the eequ motif, which is the idea that you have to ask yourself 4 burning questions, which are: what do I love? What am I good at? How can I make money with this? And what does the world need? And it's so simplistic, but actually at the heart of those questions is where you need to find yourself. And my dream for the world really is that more people have the opportunity to do that. And I see, with my futuristic kind of eyeglasses on, I can see that we really aren't going to need so many people to labour in the way that we have done in our generations. We have now a surplus of labour, and so one possibility is very dystopian, in that all those people that are no longer needed fall by the wayside and fall towards entertainment and drugs and so forth. And the other possibility is that they find that we're able to provide them with food and shelter, and they have the opportunity to contribute, not for money, but just for whatever reason, another sense of purpose.
Thank you, Vida. It was lovely to hear that, because I didn't know the responses to any of these questions. So it's wonderful to get that fuller picture of who you are as a person and what drives you. And Markus, if you would speak to the same questions, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks for the nice introduction. It's like, I had the same 3 questions. What did you learn about money when growing up? And actually, I grew up in a small Bavarian town, so very safe, and everything was very nice in the landscape. And when I grew up, we never talked about money. Money wasn't something you talked about. It was, you had it if you were lucky, and you kind of showed it maybe with a nice car or a nice house, but you never talked about how much did you actually have? Do you need the money? How important is it for you? So it was kind of a secret topic. And I never talked about money until, I would say, in my 30s. So I grew up like this, and I behaved like this for a long, long time, even in my work life. So it influenced the work I'm doing today, because I know the side where you do not talk about money, and I know the side where everything is open, where you have complete freedom and can talk about everything that concerns money and salaries, and being completely transparent, being completely open. And for myself, I have learned that being transparent and open is a huge relief when it comes to talking about money. And this is something which really switched completely in my life. A dream I have for the world where, in my perfect world, we would be able to tackle problems or everything we do in our daily life with a positive image of humanity. Because in the last years, I always try to tackle problems, even the problems we have at Einhorn with our salary, with our transparency, with a positive image of humanity. And if you have a positive image, I think a lot of things resolve itself. It's a much easier way to do.
Great, thank you, Markus, for sharing that perspective. And and I think what we all agree on here in this room, we already see sort of a red thread, is realizing that what we had so far isn't necessarily working for the future. So we do need to reinvent also how not just how organizations are run and organized, but also how salary works and how we even define what worthwhile work is in the future, because there won't be enough traditional employment for everybody on the planet. And the other piece is, of course, creating more transparency, talking more about money, and having that be a topic that is not shameful. And interestingly, the connection to you, Markus, is even a lot of people are more comfortable talking about sex and condoms, sort of, the line of work where you come from, than talking about money. And I feel that is a taboo that is worth, this deconstructing. Okay, so I would love to start by giving both of you a bit of time to talk about your respective initiatives, sort of the things that you have either done in the past or are currently doing in respect to the question of salary setting and creating transparency. And Avida, I would have you start. And if there is anything that you want to share in terms of a couple of slides, because in your case, that might actually make sense, you should be enabled to do that right now. So over to you, Avida, and you're muted.
Okay, I'll give you a brief picture. So actually, before I was working for the AI company, I was actually working in a very large and old school. And that school had an interesting culture in that they wanted to have a very flat model, and they wanted the teachers to run the school. And in order to do this, they made everything equal. They gave everybody the same salary, from kindergarten teachers through to kind of the sixth form teachers, because they believed that everyone's contribution to the best of their ability was equal. And I was there for a number of years, and we tried to work on different structures that enabled the teachers, who were at the heart of the pedagogy, to actually be the managers of the school as well, and to be able to make these prime decisions. But of course, the school was big, and it grew big, and it had huge financial resources, staffing, all of the normal issues that a normal company has. And it was very, very difficult to navigate this, and it was being navigated without technology. So everything was still very paper-based, very human-centric. And I have to say that the upshot of this experiment, if you like, which was a 100-year experiment, it been running for 100 years with this deep philosophy and belief in the goodness of the individual, failed. And it wasn't the organization as a whole wasn't successful in solving the problems that were brought before it by the modern world. And I moved ironically into the tech world, because at that time in the tech world, they're very, very interested in how does one run a leaderless organization, a decentralized, flat model. And there were some examples of this already. There was the famous Morning Star tomato food processor with thousands of people, manual labor, with no bosses and deciding their own salaries. And there was also W.L. Gore, very famous example of flat models. There were some examples of this, but as a tech company, I think they believed that there was another way which wasn't quite so human centric. And the basic concept of this is, what would happen if you basically, most people's work was through a digital interface. They were always generating digital data, and so every keystroke that they make is recorded somewhere in some database. So you're sending emails, you're on Slack, you're creating calendar entries, you're creating meetings, you are putting code into GitHub and so forth. You're creating these huge data trails that are infallible in a way. They are real evidence of what you've been doing. You just have to make sense of them. So as we grew as a company, we grew from, I was employee number one, and as we grew to, close to 100 people, we began to automate as many systems as we could to avoid having managers. So if anyone had to do anything twice, we would build something to automate that process. And obviously, when you're small, it's really easy to communicate within an organization. You kind of know what everyone's doing. You can find that out by about 9:15 in the morning by just grabbing a coffee and standing in the middle of the room. But as a company grows, it gets harder and harder to know what's going on within the company, who can help you, questions about knowledge share, leadership, how do you evaluate people, how do you understand what their contribution. It gets harder and harder, and that's actually how the manager is born. And they're just basically a kind of funnel of information. And now managers are starting to be given technology to help them to communicate faster and bigger and better. And the question for us is, could we just eliminate that altogether and just have a technical interface in which we gathered all this information together? So that's effectively what we did. And we started to, obviously we had to have this very much embedded in the culture. So everyone that came to work for the company knew that everything they did would be collected in a massive data lake. So every line of code they wrote, every email they sent, every Slack message in public or in private was collected. And of course, as a technology company, we were predominantly technologists, data scientists, and so there was very much a scientific approach to this, very much a willingness to do this, and a belief that by giving up your privacy, you're actually gaining freedom, freedom to not have to go before a council and plead your case about how impactful you've been that year or how many people you've helped or whatever. It would all there be evident in the data. So maybe I'll just share my screen and share a few images just to kind of make that a bit more
yeah, because I had a pre-conversation with Avida about this, and this sounded all very interesting. And then she shared her screen and showed me some of those data streams. And I was like, oh my God, now I get it.
So I don't know whether you can see this, but basically, if you can imagine what any normal organization will have, you might have a Google Suite for emails and Drive and documents. And every time you interact on any of these documents, it generates data, and quite a lot of data. So if you comment on a document, if you edit a document, it's all there somewhere. So what we did was we basically connected all of these things up and poured all of the data into a massive data lake and built an application on the end of it. So what we were doing was we were able to organize all of our work into a very, very strict taxonomy so that we could understand the data across all of the different applications that we were using. We all did stand-ups every day digitally, so we would be able to understand how we were splitting our time, and that helped to train the system as well. The idea was that we would ultimately not have to do that at all, and we were able to see for each of the projects that was going on. Obviously, I've had to block out some of these names and so forth, but we were able to see for every project that was going on for any period of time, not only who had been working on that project, but also what kind of skills were being applied to it. Was it data science? Was it project management? Was it optimization? So even at a glance, you could see where things were top heavy with project management perhaps, or with coding without any sort of other support or so forth. And it was very easy to see who had the most knowledge about any particular project, who effectively was the team leader or the driver to that project. We were able to show this in various different kinds of visualization to the other people in the organization, so that they could self-organize themselves between the projects, and they could offboard themselves where there was a surplus of their particular skill and onboard themselves to other places. And we were also able to see very clearly how the flow of information went through the company by picking up on emails and Slack and all the messages. We were eventually able to understand the directionality of information flow. So this is a snapshot of me 1 month for 1 month, and all the dots are people. And on the right hand side, you can see all of the flow of information, all the people that I was giving information to, and that were relying on me effectively. And on the other side, on the left-hand side, you can see all the people who gave me information, and the opacity represents how intense that information flow was. So you can see my sort of role in the company just from one glimpse. You don't need to have any information or text or any sort of narrative around it. You can just see in a snapshot for any person within the company how they sit. And we were able to do that in networks as well. So we were able to see how different people relied on each other. So we could build reliance networks, and we were able to see who within different kind of skill sets or different types of project, how did the information, what were the reliance networks? So what were the 3 primary people that you relied on for every particular person, and what would happen if you took that person out? What would happen to the bridges and the connectors in that sort of scenario? We were also able to see quite a lot of really useful information about inclusivity and equality, which I have really strong feelings about, because I don't believe that people can really assess this based on gender or race or anything like that. I think it can be done in data, and you can do that by looking at very deeply into your data and understanding what people's behaviours are, and you can let the machines decide what the clusters of those groupings are. With women, we found, for example, that there was definitely an absence of them. Although we had quite equal numbers within the organisation, we found that they stepped away from the client-facing channels and the social channels more. So you can see that there was something there. And we could even forensically look into their language and see that they used more mitigating language, like perhaps and maybe and so forth. And so they actually had different mannerisms within the written exchanges. But what you're really interested in is the salary distribution. So we did this really after we had been collecting data for a very long time, and we were able to ask everyone within the organisation to actually say what kind of salary they would like to have. And what we were able to do is we were able to allow all the other people in the organisation to vote on that salary. But we didn't just have a pure 1-for-1 vote, because obviously we had to work out if you were qualified to be able to give an opinion on that particular person. So we were able to weight those voters by their relationship with that person, and also their knowledge of everything that went on in the organisation. So we were able to give them a score that weighted their vote appropriately, so that an intern could actually vote on the CEO's salary, but it would only have the bearing related to his actual involvement with them. So I think that's probably enough for me, from me, and happy to answer any questions, but that's basically the summary of how we approached it.
Great, Avida. That is a lot to take in for somebody who's only seen this for the first time, but I think there's something quite impactful when you suddenly see the amount of information that sort of went into the system. I would like at this moment to sort of push pause, because I'll obviously come back to you in a moment, but give Markus now a bit of a chance to talk about the approach they have chosen and sort of the ups and downs in your journey, Markus, at Einhorn.
Thank you. Well, the approach we have chosen is actually very simple, because the first question we asked when it comes to salary is, how much do we actually need for living? And this was the most important question for us. And when we started off, it was actually a very, very easy process. What we do at Einhorn is we are a very free company. We are a company that works with complete freedom when it comes to working hours. We have as much vacation as we want. So we give a lot of freedom to the employees. And we said, when we give freedom to the employees when it comes to working, we have to give the same freedom when it comes to salary. So why should a CEO or someone who's on top decide what kind of salary you have or what you should earn? It doesn't make any sense. So what we did was we went on an offsite. The whole team went on an offsite, and we actually asked everyone, what do you want to earn? We made it completely transparent, and every person wrote on the left side of a flip chart what the person earned now, and on the right side of the flip chart we wrote what we wanted to earn. So very easy. It was just 1,800 euros, and on the other side it was 2,000 euros or something like that. And then we were like, okay, let's do it like this. No negotiation, nothing. We just did it. And it was actually very easy, because what we learned was that people actually behaved very responsibly when it came to salary. No one was like writing 3,000 euros plus on the right side. Nobody did that. One person actually wrote 216 euros. So really 216. She knew exactly what she needed. She knew exactly what she wanted. So nothing like, oh, let's make it 250. But she was like 216 euros. It was very impressive for me, because she knew exactly what she needed. And that was actually our starting point to our salary system, because we recognized that, but we have this very, very cool sentence, which is, if you treat grown-ups like grown-ups, they will act like grown-ups. And that actually works, because a lot of people are really, really sensitive when it comes to the topic, and make really smart decisions. So we thought, okay, let's give the freedom to the team. Let's give the decisions to the team. And that's what we made when we built our salary system. And now we have a system which actually goes from a part which is like the base income, which we set. That's like to 1,650 euros, which is like the income you need to have if you live in Berlin. It's very important for us, and nobody is allowed to go under this limit. It's not possible. But actually everyone in the company earns more. So this is just the base income. And the second part is actually your experience, like how many years of experience do you have in that field? And that gives you a certain amount of money. And the second part is something like personal issues. Like if you have a child, you get automatically 700 euros more. Because we say we want to support young families, and that's important to us. So your individual life situation also plays a role. And then you have a salary in the end. And what we do in the end is we say, okay, now we made a salary for you, which is like, we think that's a cool salary for you, but if you want to change that, you can do it. And you can go up like 2,000 euros, or you can go down 2,000 euros. And it's your decision. You can land on anything you want. Just go wild, be free, decide. and it actually works. It's part of a feedback process, but it's like the idea is to give employees the power to do something completely different. So we do not set your salary, we give you a recommendation, and what your salary is your decision.
Okay, so Markus, before we get more into that as well, I think I remember reading that you had some ups and downs in your own process, right? And some detours of stuff that you realized didn't work, because I was just thinking of what Avida shared in the beginning with the school, where they thought what is fair is that everybody gets the same thing. And, everything that I've heard so far is that is never experienced as fair. So I would be interested in your journey there.
Yeah, very emotional journey. So we shed some tears on the way. And it wasn't always easy. I mean, it sounds kind of like it's easy to do that, but it wasn't, because it was actually we had a huge discussion in every salary round we did. And people were like, salary in itself, it's connected to so many fears, like, will I be able to pay all my bills, or what do I want to do in the future? So it's connected to so many fears, but it's also connected to a lot of appreciation. I mean, the worth of myself is in a classic environment measured in money. And that's, of course, even myself, and I have build this system with my colleagues, even myself, I'm sitting in every salary round and thinking the same questions, and I'm also emotionally very attached, and I think it's just human to have these kind of feelings, and to look what is my colleague earning and what is my colleague earning on the right, and it's mixed feelings are just part of the process, and it's completely normal.
So speaking of mixed feelings, and and it really sounds to me like the process, that the route you have chosen is it's a very feeling one, right? It's a very emotional one. It has a lot to do with lots of human contact on the way. And so I'd be interested, Avida, in sort of your take on how emotional or non-emotional did you experience the data-driven process then to be in the end in the organization?
Well, we really tried to remove the emotion from it entirely, because I'm really surprised, just for example, about the decision to give extra money for people who have a child. So in our company, that would never have washed, because and I remember having a debate about it even in the school, that there was many people who felt that having a child was a personal luxury decision, and it wasn't really different to someone maybe having an expensive horse or something like that, and for them it was very important, and or motorcycle or whatever it is, and why should somebody who chooses to have a child have more money? So these kind of things we definitely removed entirely, so that there was the only question was not your experience, because we didn't believe that you should be paid on the basis of your experience, not at all. The question was contribution. What's the contribution? And what I really wanted to get to is impact. What has your impact been? Because you could have someone that contributed very diligently, but was actually completely ineffectual. And so despite their loyalty, didn't have a huge impact on the company. And you could have someone who was actually quite lazy and not working to their highest potential, but they're just such a genius that actually the impact that they have on the company was massive, and it would be unfair not to reward them for that. So you have all of these different possibilities. So I felt personally the only way to do would be completely remove emotions from it, completely remove any sort of negotiations, which I think is similar to what Markus is saying, take the negotiation out of it. But one of the things I think is really similar is the idea of transparency. And if any company wanted to make a first step, the simplest and most dramatic change would be to make all salaries open, and to make people request their salary as opposed to receive it, because just that one tiny act changes entirely the culture, because you have to live up to that request, and you have to know that your colleague knows that you're earning that salary, and that tiny fact is enough to change an organization overnight.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Markus, as I'm listening to this, and prior to my to our meeting here, as I said, I had a conversation with Avida, and I sort of left with two voices in my head. On the one hand, I was absolutely fascinated. I was like, "Whoa, this is mind blowing," and it is probably where the future is heading anyway, right? Because we can't get away from data and AI, and those kind of things will become common, I would assume. And at the same time, and that is maybe also a cultural factor, because in Germany in particular, we have a very strong tendency to maintain people's privacy. So from a data protection viewpoint, I don't even know if any of what you just described, Avida, would even be allowed here, right? Much of that might not even be legal in Germany. And it made me uncomfortable, because I felt, we're turning people into these glass human beings where we assume everything is quantifiable. And then I wondered, as I was now listening to you and Markus, if on some level there is not a degree of understanding in people, even though the process is probably much more messy when you don't have these data streams and you don't have that analysis. But I'm wondering, Markus, if you feel that ultimately you're sort of landing at a similar place with what you're doing in your organization.
Well, actually, I had one thought, and it's like it's really fascinating for me too, and it kind of, to be honest, it feels a little weird for me too, to hear this. But actually, I think maybe it's not that different, because one thing that both systems have in common is the transparency. And what we do at Einhorn is we try to understand the situations of our colleagues, of our employees. And the more transparent you are, the better I can understand why you need that money and why you want that specific salary. So I think transparency is very key to both systems. I think we live it in a different way, and we have a different approach to why we need detail and transparency and what we are going to do with it. But I think the moment you, like I said, the moment you make salaries transparent, it's a game changer. And that's actually what we felt from the start. And the first thing we did when we went into this whole new pay movement was transparency. It was the very first step we did on our journey.
And Markus, the thing that I wanted to connect to is that I was wondering if once you create transparency, right, once you become that visible, there's also a degree of peer pressure regulation, I would assume, sort of begins to happen in the system, right? So if I sit there and I declare on a flip chart that I want to have 5K every month, and everybody else around me is sort of at 2.5, people are going to look at me, right? So to some degree, I will have to justify with the impact, and that's to your point, Avida, that I've created, that somehow that still feels fair in the system, because I would assume if I'm completely an outlier with what I'm asking for, that creates a level of debate that what might either drive me out of the organization at some point, or it will lead me to regulate what I'm asking for, or I might be able to convince everybody that I actually do deserve that, because Avida, maybe I'm that genius who only works an hour a day, but the impact I create is so amazing that people go, whatever, give Nadia the 5K. So I would be interested in that, Markus.
Yeah, I mean, I think, of course, I mean, it is perfectly natural to look around and focus on other people and their salaries. I think it's absolutely normal. And I do not feel a certain pressure, to be honest, in our system, but I feel like there's a huge need for feedback and communication, because if you don't have the communication, it doesn't work. And the more we communicate and the better the feedback is, the better the system works, because the system alone is not something you can, it's not like a blueprint, but it's highly embedded in the culture of the company and the people that work with it. And so when it comes to feedback and communication, I think that's a huge key to make the system work. And of course, it's not for everyone. I mean, we had one employee too who was a sales manager and always wanted to become rich. And then maybe it's not your part in the company. Maybe it's not the right company for you. And he left after 2 years, which is perfectly fine. I mean, he always wanted to drive a Range Rover and stuff. And it's like, you can do that, but it's probably not, it's probably not your place then. And it's something you have to accept too.
Mm-hmm. And Avida, what was your observation in that particular setting then, once the system had done its magic in the background and sort of spat out a number? What happened then? Was there a need for communication about that, or was everything crystal clear at that point?
So just for clarity, I think the transparency aspect of our approaches are similar, but there's a very, very different approach in that what Markus is doing is he's asking people what they need to live. And what we're saying is, we don't care what you need to live. What has your impact been? And so it's a really, really different approach philosophically. So just for clarity, in terms of the voting, we didn't just leave it at a vote. What we did was we represented the votes back to the employees as swarm diagrams. So you could see, we asked everybody to vote one of 3 ways, which is that the individual should request a higher salary, the individual should request a lower salary, or the request was accurate. And so we asked everybody, we did 3 rounds. And so we then showed people their results as a swarm diagram across those 3 votes, those 3 voting clusters. So you could see where you fell compared to everyone else who had received a vote in one of those buckets. So you could actually evaluate, say, if your votes came out a little bit that you'd asked too much, you could see how far along you were from the swarm diagram into that cluster. So you say, okay, I've asked for a bit too much, but I'm the lowest of all the people that have asked for too much, so I'm nearly there. Or I've asked for too little and I am way down the bottom, so I'm like out of the ballpark. And when I saw that play out, so they could then go back and request another one, and we did a whole nother round. So we had 2 rounds of voting to let people calibrate their own requests. So most people, 75% of the people in the company, then adjusted themselves based on this feedback, which was effectively anonymous, but they knew it had come from their peers. And we did encourage people to go and talk to their peers before requesting their salary. But that was a disaster because nobody could talk honestly. Nobody could really honestly say, with everyone just went and asked this, or do you think I'm worth this? And everyone was, oh, yes, absolutely. And then they'd vote differently. So, you know, so actually, this was the needed feedback that people needed. And there were some people that were disappointed, but it was also really obvious that some people's personalities meant that they asked for less than they deserved, and they asked for they were contented with less than they deserved. And that's the biggest problem. And I probably fell into that bracket as well. And it was only by seeing my own data and really seeing in, you know, black and white what my impact was from a data perspective of the company, could I even accept in myself what my salary was deserving, what salary I deserved. And so this is much more prevalent in women, I have to say, that they are genuinely content with less. And so that is the danger of the non-data way.
Mm-hmm. So that would actually be a question to both of you from my end. Sort of, how does it address the gender pay gap, right? So Avida, you were already talking a bit about that and how you realized a lot of women were sort of chronically undervaluing their contribution. So what happened with that in that company?
Well, they were guided by the votes to increase their request, and it was awkward for them. They were like, oh no, I don't deserve it, but they were almost forced to request higher salary. And so they ended up on a more accurate appreciation of their own. They could look at their own data. That's the first step, and see, actually, a lot of people rely on me. If I look at my impact, you know, if I look at my involvement in Slack in these areas, in these projects, if I look at the percentage contribution, if I look at all of these pieces of data, I can see compared to other people what I deserve. So that was the first step. And then if they still got it wrong in their request, then they would have these 2 rounds of voting to kind of force their salary requests up.
Mm-hmm. And Markus, what's your experience in terms of the gender pay gap and your approach to salary setting?
Well, actually, I'm really happy to say we do not have any gender pay gap. It just doesn't exist. I think, but we're a 5-year-old company. We're kind of new, and we never had one. It's like transparency from the start. It's just, it has never been an issue for us. Luckily, actually, I think women, I think they even earn a little more in our company, but it's okay. It's like from the system. If I think it through now, they even earn a little more, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, everybody, like I said, can like I can see its own situation. And actually, the division we actually did not want to have, and what was a problem from our start was actually what like we said, quiet people and very confident people. And we had a lot of very confident people who were very outspoken and who had very good negotiation skills. And these were the people who actually earned more. And the quiet people and shy people did not earn as much as they deserved. And that was a problem we wanted to tackle from the start. And that was actually the bigger issue for us. Mm-hmm.
And do you feel that problem had been resolved or has been resolved through the process that you have now?
Yes, but after a few years of hard work, not from the start, but actually what we try to do is to offer rooms where you can talk about salary constantly. Actually, we have one, like a consultation hour every month where you can come talk to the salary council. And actually, I think it's like making up rooms to be able to talk about this topic is very important. That's what we try to do. And actually, our feedback process has also evolved very much over the years and has gotten better and better. So yes, I would say now we are able to like include the shy people and be able to offer them a good salary. But it has been an issue from the start and has been a lot of hard work to come to that point.
Markus, when I hear that, it also appears to me that your salary process is very much tied in with a personal development process in a way, right? So what you're doing is you're using this process to surface some of the inner work topics that people probably need to look at. You said it's tied to a feedback process. So in how far do you feel it has made you as a company more conscious to deal with money in this way?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's like our feedback process in the start was horrible. I mean, like, it was like I think we are very nice people, and everyone is like really nice and kind. And feedback was like, "Oh, you're a great person. You're doing a great job." And I have this one little issue which I actually wanted to talk about, and everyone, but was like, and we've gotten very, very much in that field. It's like it was a huge process to be able to give good and critical feedback, and that was like a key. And actually, salary was the hardest topic to give good feedback. And actually, what we learned in that field, in like having feedbacks on salary, on how much you earn and your individual life situations, has been a huge learn effect for the whole company and for every process we do every day. And because it actually, for me, it always feels like the hardest topic to talk about. That's actually the one where you learn most.
Avida, what place do you feel does personal development have in this inner work, in this, if any? Is there a connection for you?
Well, I've done a lot of work on feedback as well, and I would say that I've tried very hard to separate the salary distribution process from the feedback processes that need to exist within a company for personal development purposes. So I kind of think of it like feedback being, if you think of it as a personal accounting, feedback is like your cash flow. It alters every day, and you can sort of create a cash flow, and then you can reconcile it every day. But your salary distribution moment is like the balance sheet. It's like snapshot in time. This is the upshot of everything that's happened, and if you connect the two too closely, the feedback process and the salary distribution, then it becomes riddled with anxiety, and it's already hard enough, the feedback process, that if you connect it to how much money you're going to get and your livelihood, then you're damned from the very beginning. So how do you get people to give honest feedback to other people? It's game theory, basically. So this is something, evolutionarily deep in us, that we're social creatures, and we have to engage in game theory to get involved with groups. So we're worried that if we give feedback to somebody that's honest and is somewhat critical, then that might affect our relationship with them. And as long as the situation isn't so critical that it's going to affect our work, it's much easier not to give that feedback and to maintain a stable relationship. And it's really important for human beings to behave like that. So as a company, you need to have a learning organization. So you need to somehow extract from people you have to not extract from people, but you have to create a culture in which it suddenly becomes the norm to exchange honest feedback. And there are examples of cultures that do that really well. And one example that I always cite, which I learned from, I used to have lodgers in my house, and I used to live next to Gatwick Airport, which is the biggest airport in the UK. And all my lodgers were young pilots, and I learned a lot about the airline industry from them. And in the airline industry, I've had a very, very interesting period of a couple of decades in terms of feedback and the black box, because they discovered that all airline crashes, effectively 99.9% of them, were not due to technical errors, they were due to human errors, basically. And so they had to really, really quick work out what within the culture allowed these errors to escalate and accumulate. And a lot of it was in many kind of many airlines that came from cultures that had very subservient hierarchies, the people lower down than the captain could see that things were going wrong, but they actually couldn't say it. They felt that they weren't able to say it because it was inappropriate to criticize your senior or anything like that. And they worked really, really hard to embed this kind of feeling that if you don't see things as you see them immediately and call up anyone like a peer, then you are failing in your job, basically, and you're not safe to fly with. And so if anybody, at the end of each flight, there's this moment where the air stewardess and the captain and they all talk to each other very, very straight. And if they don't, they will choose not to fly with them because they consider them to be unsafe. And so you can make that culture happen, but it's just incredible hard work, and it has to start with the leaders. That means that you have to give up some of your likability to be really, really honest, to provide honest feedback to your employees, in the hope that in the future they will then bring that culture forward into their relationships. I guess that's the best I can say.
Yeah, well, that to me, it makes perfect sense. And I would also assume that Markus would fully agree with that, and sort of the importance of sort of an immediate and fearless feedback culture in a way, right? That is not dependent on your status in the organization, but that serves sort of a greater good at the end of the day, keeping your plane in the air, if you want to stay with that metaphor. The only part where I would disagree is that you said organizations that tie feedback culture to money conversations are sort of doomed. And I've seen different, very different processes around this, where I would say, in many ways, our relationship to money brings up everything in our personality that we haven't yet looked at. It's sort of the direct door into the deepest recesses of our personality. And it can stimulate some of the most fascinating conversations and bring up the deepest fear in our psyche. And I in many ways would even say the opposite of saying that is a lost conversation for me if we don't have that, because there's so much tied to our relationship to money psychologically. Listen, at this point, I do have more questions, but I would now like to have a little of a step change here and actually ask everybody online to turn on your cameras, please, so that we can see all of your amazing faces. So yes, hi, everybody. So it's great to see you. Hi, wonderful. Because I'm pretty sure that all of you were following this with as much interest as I just had, and there are probably questions for you as well that are boiling in you. So I would love to turn the floor over to the questions you have. You can raise your hand electronically. So if you go down the screen with your mouse, there's a little button that says reactions, and then you can raise your electronic yellow hand. And Simon, we have you up. Unmute yourself.
Oh, thank you. Thank you to both of you. That was incredibly interesting, particularly because we are just about to launch ourselves into a review of our remuneration policy. The foundation has existed for years with a completely flat remuneration policy, which has lasted for decades, but has created problems. Let's just leave it at that. But I'm just curious, Markus, how many people are there in and Avida, how many people are there in your organizations?
Thank you, Simon. Markus, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, we do have 25 employees, so it's still very small and still on the level where you can really talk to each other a lot, which is very, very cool for us. And we are actually still in a discussion about how much we want to grow. Right now, it feels actually really good, and it feels like we do not want to grow so much because it's a very good level to be able to talk to each other and have a personal relationship.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Avida?
When I left my previous organization, it was about 80.
Mm-hmm. And that was probably, where would you say, Avida, it sort of hit the point where you felt so suddenly we cannot manage this just through the conversations that Markus was just talking about?
We never did. We always knew from even one employee we weren't going to do it like that. So it was a deliberate day one approach that we were going to. And in the very early days, it felt very heavy-handed to be collecting data about a handful of people, but we were utterly determined to have that future.
Great, thank you. Simon, do you have a follow-up question on that?
Well, let other people, I mean, there's loads and loads that I'd love to ask.
Well, go ahead. We don't have any hand up yet, so I'm assuming you have the floor.
Well, I think, I mean, I'm just fascinated by the process. So we are having to unlock a culture that has been embedded for a very long time. We've just been through a pretty horrendous process of redundancy. So the workforce has reduced from 130 to 47. So, and so this is part of creating a new culture here. And to my mind, one of the things that you said was that discussions about money can access the deepest parts of our psyche and the parts that are at least touched. I know that that's what's going to happen. And that, this is not going to be a straightforward, simple thing that will just happen in a couple of weeks, but this is a process that will probably go on for years from now on, and that we just need to accept there'll be incremental steps rather than launching into some wonderful and amazing remuneration policy.
Yes, well then all the best of luck on that journey, Simon. Don't give up. There's a brighter future ahead. Wonderful. Who else has a question for one of them, both of them, or a reflection, something that came to you as you were listening? So I see Peter. You look like you're clapping, but maybe it's your hand up. And then we have Manuel. Peter?
Yes, thank you.
Did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. It's gone now. I don't know why, but it's gone. I wanted to thank Avida and Markus. It's really incredible for me to hear about those things. I'm so far away from this world, but it's really amazing that that your companies are dealing with salaries that way. It's really beautiful. And just out of curiosity, I wanted to know which is the level between the highest and the smallest salary in your both companies.
Thank you. Markus.
Well, actually, what we did is we established a tripling factor, meaning the lowest salary and the highest salary can be, the highest can be 3 times as much as the lowest, and not more. And that's fixed because actually what we wanted is that we did not want to have a huge division, like when the CEO earns like 200,000 euros a year and logistics is like 1,600. It just didn't feel fair for us. And what we set out was to have a fair salary system. And the word fair is even up for discussion. It's honestly, it's really hard to have a fair system and to define what is actually fair. But we felt that a huge division in the company is not good for the team, and we felt that the tripling factor is okay, but that actually means that our founders earn a lot less than usual founders do in other companies, and that is something they accept.
Avida?
Oh, so at my previous company, the highest salary was around 150,000 euros, and the lowest would be minimum wage, which would be around 20,000 euros. And most salaries would be falling in the kind of 50 to 70,000 bracket.
And still between the highest and the lowest, all of that was transparent as well. So the highest earners were known in the system as well.
Yeah, every single person.
Great, thank you. Manuel, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, my question is kind of in regards to not really salary so much, but also the ownership or the share that the employees have in the company. And also the second follow-up question would then be like for how smart contracts are now entering the space with cryptocurrencies, if that is also something that you guys are involved with and are testing possibly.
Either one of you. Avida, do you want to start?
Well, yeah, I mean, I can say that. So the first question before the smart contract, sorry, just remind me, was the...
Just kind of like the ownership. If people, you know, like you are your long-term employee and you've added a lot to value to the company, do you also have a stake in the company, so to speak, kind of,
So no, that really wasn't a part of it. And in the UK, there isn't a huge culture of share ownership of early employees. It doesn't seem to be a thing. And I think it's because English people are a bit more kind of risk averse, and you know, it just isn't as big a thing, I don't think, in Europe, as so there really wasn't many shares given out. I think it is important, and I think probably one of the biggest things that holds startups back from doing that is that it's just really complicated. It's really complicated to do all the admin, the associated admin, and to, you know, there's a couple of nice platforms coming out now that are giving good displays for share ownership, but I reckon that's probably the next big thing. That would be a really nice thing to see, but it's very hard to describe the value of a company at any particular stage, especially in the first few startup years, because it can leap in the millions within months. And then in terms of the smart contracts, I mean, I am very interested in this technology, but I don't see the point of it for what we're doing, because there has to be an absence of trust for there to really be a need to use blockchain. So where I see it coming into effect is as the world moves more towards gig working, because really with these kind of technologies, in terms of being able to evaluate people's contributions, the big impact that's going to happen is that we're going to move away from the kind of nanny employee status, where the employee is responsible for your health and well-being and pension, and all of that's going to disappear, and we'll be able to just pay people for their contribution, which is effectively a move towards gig working. And as we're able to work remotely, then the relationship, the trust between the gig worker and their employer is going to dissipate. And in that scenario, then you could imagine, particularly in realms like coding, where it would be very easy to be able to set up a remuneration based on a certain level of productivity, or a certain rankings within with this data. Not very easy, but you could see that being possible with certain types of work.
Can I just ask a follow-up question real quick to that?
Sure, go ahead.
So then in that regard, it will almost be very interesting. So the impact that you have as an employee, you know, tracing it further down the line would then, that's what I mean kind of by tying it to the smart contract. So like kind of like how NFTs are now, you have a resale value, and then that resale value also gets distributed to the artist that initially created it. That's kind of what I mean.
Well, at the moment, I don't think that many people believe that they will do work and not get paid for it. So, you know, even if you do, you've got to have the smart contract work. You've got to have an agreed description of what that work looks like and what it looks like when it's done. And if you can think about how many pieces of work where you could agree in advance what it looks like done, including quality, volume, everything like that, any type of work like that could potentially be, it could be used in a smart contract situation. And we're getting to the point where we could just about understand volumes of work in certain ways, but not necessarily quality. With written work, yes, the data science is getting very good, so you can look at you can look at quality of narratives now as well. With coding, I don't know how much work has been done recently, but when I was last looking at it, it was more of a difficult thing, because it's almost inversely related to the number of lines of code. The number of lines of codes doesn't mean that you're a good developer, because you kind of, if you're a good developer, you write really, really thin, short, you know, beautiful code. But that people were already working on being able to determine the quality of code. So it is possible that you could use machine learning to evaluate the quality and quantity of a certain type of work. And for that, you could use a smart contract and say, when this is done, then release the money. But even in that scenario, I can't see why you would go to that effort, because I think you could just do that without a smart contract. You'd have to really believe, you'd have to be dealing with a drugs baron or something that you thought you would never get your money from. I just can't see the scenario where that would happen.
Markus, any thoughts on your end on these two questions about distributed ownership or shared ownership and the smart contracts?
Yeah, well, I'd be glad to answer the first question. The second is just not an issue for us right now. But actually, well, Einhorn is a purpose company, which means that Einhorn belongs to itself. So nobody has shares. Einhorn is actually a company where no profits can be taken out of it, not even by the founders. We are a company which cannot be sold. We are a company that actually decisions can only be made within the company. So we do not have any investors. Even if we would have, they would not be able to make any decisions, because all decisions have to lie within the company with the employees. And that's actually a very charming construct for us, because it actually resembles what we feel as a team.
Mm-hmm. Markus, maybe you can even post a link to the Purpose Foundation for those listening in who might be interested in that kind of a model, because it's a very, you know, Avida, as you were saying, as in the UK, in Germany, it is very, very complex to set up a company structure that allows for shared ownership. And there's a foundation now based in Germany who are trying to change that on a legal level and trying to make that basically create an alternative company structure that is legally recognized and that is easier to set up. Because I've just recently read a report about an organization with 500 employees that sort of went from an old ownership structure to a shared ownership structure, and even just the process cost them something around 500K. So it's, you know, it's not an easy thing to do, especially if you already have a system in place. And for those who might be interested in setting that up from the start, the Purpose Foundation is one place where you can look for guidance and inspiration in that area. It's not quite the same as a B corporation. So it really speaks more to the, Markus, you can probably say more about that than I can, but I just saw you shaking your head.
No, it's fine. It's just, it's like B Corp is really something different, because B Corp is more of a network, and actually purpose really means that the company belongs to itself, which is a real game changer within the team, because actually this is my company and I'm safe, and I know this company will never be sold, which is a huge motivation booster. So it really changes the culture of the company, and that is something that purpose economy is really able to do.
Yeah, thank you. We have Andy, you have your hand up.
Yeah, Nadia, you said, thank you first, Avida and Markus. This has been really thought and heart-provoking, and exciting to see how two really different approaches can lead to a similar outcome. You actually, though, said, this is a question for you, Nadia. You said something like making glass people. Like if we have all of the data on people, then in a way we're sort of assuming we can know everything about a person. At least that's how I remembered it. And then we kind of continued moving, but that just like landed in me. And I wondered if you could say more about, and Avida, I welcome, and Markus, your thoughts too, just sort of what are the trade-offs, the potential risks or losses that come with having everything be quantified?
Well, yeah, thank you for that question, Andy. For me, you know, it goes back to what Avida said about, in a way, it's nearly a philosophical question about what is our view of human beings, and what is our view of the kind of future that we want to co-create. And so, for example, I have a strong sort of negative resonance, if I could say that, with this whole self-quantifying movement, right? Where you every step is measured by some device on your wrist or somewhere else, and then you look at your data, and then you adapt what you eat, you adapt what your calorie intake, you adapt your exercises, you adapt how much you sleep and when. At the same time, I can also appreciate that I have friends who are part of this movement and think it's amazing, right? And it has really brought a deeper quality to their life. So I do think it's also a very personal choice, but it boils down to that word for me. I would like to live in a world where we do have a little bit of choice about some parts of us remaining private, and also assuming that some parts of what we are and what we do can maybe not be fully quantified. Also, because I sort of fear it leads to sort of a culture of ableness, right? Where people who might not be geniuses, who might not be able to compete in the gig economy, what is going to happen with them, right? Are they going to fall off the wayside? Like, I think it's a bigger philosophical question that we probably can't answer today, but that was sort of my first response to when I heard Avida speak about this. Any follow-up or anything that you want to add before I go to Avida and Markus? No? Okay, good. Avida.
Well, I've thought very deeply about this, and the first answer I would say is it would not be possible to quantify everything that any given employee or team member did for a team, because you just can't. But the question for me is, could you get a picture at least as good, if not better, than a manager? And the answer to that for me is categorically yes. because, you know, even the most sophisticated manager cannot be there all the time. They cannot observe everything that goes on. They cannot know what their peers are, this person's peers are thinking. They are going to be influenced by all manner of personal things. And so it doesn't ever need to be that good. It just, it can be very simple to be better than a human being. And for me, salary distribution is very boring. It takes up a lot of a company's time. I'm personally not interested in my salary. I just want it to be fair, and then I want to move on and I want to do my work. And I think that you can slip into a drowning quagmire by devoting hours and hours. If you look at how much time Google spend on distributing their salaries, how much money and personnel are put into this, it's absolutely eye-watering. I don't have the stats off the top of my head, but I've looked into it. These big companies, they just drown in it. And you know, you could do yourself and your company and all of your colleagues such a service by just taking it off the table with data and making it really simple and just making it a non-issue.
Mm-hmm. Markus?
Yeah, well, it's highly fascinating. It's like, I mean, we have a completely different approach. I think it's I'm a lot with you, Nadia, because I feel like in the end it's important which person has the choice to make the decision. And what we do is I'm a huge fan of transparency, because I think the better you understand what a person does and why he does it, the better you can make the decisions. In terms of quantifications, that's actually something we shy away from a lot. But because our culture is so different and so open and so much focused on the individual, I think it's just a completely different approach. So it's hard for me to connect.
But you know, at the same time, I'm sort of wildly fascinated by these
Absolutely
completely different worlds, right? And there is some overlap, because I see the transparency piece, obviously, that was mentioned a few times. The other piece that I also see is, you know, what Avida just said about no manager does have enough information to make a fair choice about these things. I think that is absolutely true. And that's why in your system, you have the whole team involved in everything. However, another thought that just came up for me was also maybe we need to look at how big a system even is, right? Because I can absolutely see the point, Avida, that you just made for a company like Google, you know, especially being as tech-driven as they are, with that many employees. Maybe you would even create a much fairer system if you relied on data much more in that context. And that may not be the same picture for a company that has 25 employees, right? No. So, which is also a very different living environment in a way. And that is something to consider potentially. Yeah. So listen, we're nearing the end of our conversation here. We have one more hand up. Claire, I would like to give you the last question, if you could unmute yourself.
Oh, thank you. This is absolutely fascinating. And I really like, Avida, the idea that it sort of takes out the prejudices that managers can have in some ways, that although it's personal, and some ways, you know, we've got intuitions that we may not always be able to articulate, but they can be positive or negative depending on the situation. But the fact that the staff then get a chance to participate, and you get this iteration of being able to see where you are on this sort of the scatter graph, or the I can't remember quite what you call it.
Diagram, yeah.
Yeah, that there is a, you know, the personal does come into it, or the people's opinions, and probably reflects the culture of a very dynamic organization that is doing data. So I think that probably different strokes for different folks, but both really, really exciting. Thank you.
Great, Claire, thank you so much. That was nearly a wonderful closing statement, I would say. So at this point, I just, before I have a few sort of closing remarks for all of us, I really want to thank both of you, Avida and Markus, for this thought-provoking conversation. I mean, my mind is blown. Like, you know, there's so much going on there right now in terms of thinking about the future, where this will lead, what the philosophical foundation of what we want to create is, how to look at small systems, big systems. So a lot of food for thought. And thank you for being here. So as we are nearing the end of our session, I will post a few links for all of you in the chat, if I can do this here now. So firstly, we have the link to Avida, your website, because we didn't even get into the whole question of education at this point, but I know you've created a wonderful learning platform, and I want to give you sort of one sentence about that if you want to say something about what you're up to now.
We're trying to make it possible to have a decentralized education system.
Wonderful. So, and how do you properly pronounce your company?
eequ.
Okay, so I didn't butcher it too much in the beginning. That's good to know. Yeah, so please do have a look at Avida's company and what they're doing. And Markus, do you want to say something about condoms to close?
No, it's just, I mean, I played one small remark. I mean, Einon is not really about condoms. We do sell condoms, and they are pretty good. These are really good condoms. But actually, Einon is set out to be a social company. And actually, what we are doing is we try to do a little positive in the world. We reinvest 50% of our profits into social and sustainable projects. And that's actually the reason why we founded this company. So selling condoms is just to finance all the other great stuff we're doing.
Fantastic. Again, a very different reason to set up a company than many of them out there. Right, so you can look at eequ, you can look at Einhorn. Another link that I posted is to the Money and Business Partnership Congress. So Peter Koenig, the mentor with whom I've been working out all of these things around money and money work and looking at money as the foundation of so much of our suffering right now, but also as a solution moving into a different future. If you're interested in any of these topics, please join us at the Money and Business Partnership Congress that will take place from the 11th to the 14th of April. And then for any of you who are interested in digging deeper into the subject of money based on Peter Koenig's money work, we have created CU Money, which is an 11-week program where we take apart all of our deepest beliefs around money, look at where they come from, how they affect the current money reality that we're experiencing, how it affects the way we work with other people, how it affects our relationship, and how we can actually use it as an entry point into, I would say, a deep process of personal and psychological healing. So if you want to look at that, then click the CU Money link in the chat as well. And so now we have a very quick closing ritual. If you would all unmute yourself, everybody who's on screen and not on screen, that would be fantastic, so that you can say goodbye to everybody and stretch out your hand. So we make a little human connection in this disconnected world, so you can tickle somebody's head and shake their hands to the left and to the right. Okay, everybody, it was so wonderful for you to be here. Bye to all the old friends and new friends. Have a wonderful evening. And Markus and Avida, if you would just want to stay on for one more minute, that would be great. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye-bye. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Great. So we have a lot of wonderful feedback here. I got a few private messages as well. You guys, thank you. That was fantastic. I go home with